On the first day of November, 1943, a 23-year-old Marine sergeant made a decision that would cost him his life and save thousands of others. This is the story of the single most decisive individual action in the battle for Bougainville, a moment of calculated violence that changed the course of the Pacific campaign. Before this video ends, you will witness what happens when one man confronts an entire gun crew alone, inside their own fortress, while the fate of 7,500 Marines hangs in the balance. If you value stories of extraordinary courage rooted in historical truth, subscribe to this channel now, stay with us until the final moment, and comment below with the city, state, or country you are watching from. What you are about to hear is not legend. It is documented history. And it begins at dawn. The sky over Empress Augusta Bay was the color of old iron on the morning of November 1st, 1943. Low clouds pressed down on the Solomon Sea, and the air carried the weight of approaching rain. The water itself was dark, textured by wind, and it reflected nothing. Across this expanse moved the largest amphibious force yet assembled in the South Pacific Theater, a fleet of destroyers, transports, and landing craft bearing the 3rd Marine Division toward the shores of Bougainville. The island rose ahead of them like a wall of green darkness, its volcanic peaks hidden in mist, its coastline fringed with coconut palms that swayed in the wind. Somewhere in that jungle waited the Japanese defenders of the empire, and they had been waiting for weeks. Aboard the transport ships, the Marines had already eaten their pre-invasion breakfast, a grim ritual of eggs and coffee consumed in near silence. The men of the 3rd Marine Division were not green replacements. Many had seen combat at Guadalcanal. They knew what awaited them on the beach, and they did not speak of it. Instead, they checked their rifles, adjusted the straps on their packs, and stood in the pre-dawn darkness, each man alone with his thoughts. Among them was Sergeant Robert Allan Owens, a squad leader in the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines. He was 23 years old, tall and lean, with the quiet competence that comes from months of training and the kind of steadiness that other men noticed. He did not talk much, but when he spoke, others listened. He had joined the Marine Corps in 1941, before Pearl Harbor, and he had trained at Camp Lejeune under instructors who believed that discipline and marksmanship were the only things that kept men alive in combat. Owens had absorbed those lessons completely. He did not consider himself special. He considered himself prepared. At approximately 0600 hours, the first wave of landing craft lowered away from the transports and began the run toward shore. The Marines sat shoulder to shoulder on the wooden benches, rifles between their knees, helmets pulled low. The boats pitched and rolled in the chop, and seawater sprayed over the ramps. No one spoke. The only sounds were the engines, the slap of waves against steel, and the distant rumble of naval gunfire as destroyers shelled the coast. The bombardment was meant to soften the defenses, to destroy bunkers and gun positions before the Marines reached the beach. But naval gunfire, no matter how intense, could not destroy everything. Some fortifications were too well concealed, too deeply buried in the earth. And some weapons were designed to wait. The beach at Cape Torokina was a narrow strip of dark sand bordered by jungle so thick it seemed impenetrable. Behind the tree line, the ground rose sharply into ridges covered with kunai grass and volcanic rock. The Japanese had spent weeks preparing this ground. They had dug trenches, constructed bunkers from coconut logs and coral, and positioned artillery to cover every approach. The defensive plan was simple and effective. Allow the Americans to land. Let them crowd the beach. Then destroy them with pre-registered fire. It was a killing zone, and the Japanese were patient. The first landing craft touched down at approximately 0700 hours. The ramps dropped and the Marines charged into knee-deep water, rifles held high. The beach was narrower than expected and the surf was stronger. Men stumbled, fell, dragged themselves upright, and kept moving. For a brief moment there was no resistance. The jungle was silent. Then the machine guns opened fire. The sound was instantaneous and overwhelming. Japanese Type 92 heavy machine guns, positioned in camouflaged bunkers along the tree line, began raking the beach with interlocking fields of fire. Bullets snapped through the air, struck the sand, ricocheted off coral. Marines dropped, some killed instantly, others wounded and struggling to crawl toward cover that did not exist. The noise was constant, a crackling roar that drowned out shouted orders. Men flattened themselves behind driftwood, behind the bodies of the dead, behind anything. The first wave was pinned within minutes. Then the artillery began. At approximately 0726, a Japanese 75mm Type 41 mountain gun, concealed inside a heavily reinforced bunker approximately 70 yards inland, fired its first shell directly into the landing zone. The explosion lifted sand and water into the air, and when it fell, 3 Marines were dead. The gun fired again. A landing craft disintegrated in a fountain of flame and shrapnel. The crew was vaporized. Fragments of steel and wood rained down across the beach. The gun fired a third time, a fourth, a fifth. Each round found a target. Landing craft, supply crates, clusters of men attempting to move inland. The beach was becoming a slaughterhouse. Sergeant Robert Owens had reached the shore in the second wave. He had made it across the beach and taken cover behind a shattered palm log approximately 30 yards from the water. Around him, Marines were pressed flat against the sand, faces turned away from the incoming fire. The sound of the 75mm gun was distinct from the machine guns, a deep, percussive crack followed by the shriek of the shell, and then the explosion. Owens counted the intervals. The gun was firing approximately every 15 seconds. It was methodical, disciplined, devastatingly effective. He could not see the bunker itself, only the muzzle flash, a brief orange bloom that appeared in the same location each time, somewhere in the dense vegetation beyond the tree line. He knew what it meant. The gun was protected. It was dug in, and it was killing his battalion. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. 7,500 Marines were either on the beach or in landing craft approaching the shore, and all of them were within range of that single gun. 4 landing craft had already been destroyed. At least 10 more were damaged, some taking on water, others burning. The wounded were being dragged to the rear, but there was no rear, only the surf. Medical corpsmen worked frantically, their hands slick with blood, their supplies running low. Officers shouted orders, but the noise made communication nearly impossible. The entire assault was stalling. If the gun was not silenced, the landing would fail. If the landing failed, the campaign would fail. And if the campaign failed, the strategic isolation of Rabaul, the key to Japan's defense of the South Pacific, would remain impossible. Owens understood this, not in strategic terms, not in the language of headquarters, but in the immediate, visceral knowledge that comes from being present at the point of decision. He understood that someone had to move, someone had to do something, and he understood that the something required was almost certainly suicidal. He raised his head slightly and studied the bunker's position. The muzzle flash came from a firing port no more than 2 feet wide, set into a structure that was invisible except for that momentary light. The bunker was frontal. It faced the beach directly. There were no flanking approaches. The jungle on either side was too dense, too exposed to supporting fire from other positions. Rifle fire would not penetrate the coconut logs. Grenades could not be thrown accurately at that distance, and even if they could, the firing port was too narrow, too well protected. The only way to silence the gun was to get inside the bunker, and the only way inside was through the firing port. which meant crossing 70 yards of open ground under direct fire from a weapon designed to destroy vehicles. Owens turned to the Marines near him. 4 men. He knew their names, he knew their capabilities. He did not ask them to follow him, he told them what he needed. Suppressive fire on the adjacent bunkers, enough to keep the machine gunners occupied, enough to give him a chance. The men nodded. They understood. They did not argue. They did not question. They simply checked their rifles, fixed their bayonets, and prepared to do what was asked. Owens checked his own weapon. The M1 Garand, the standard infantry rifle of the United States military, chambered in .30-06 Springfield, 8 rounds in the en-bloc clip. He had 3 additional clips in his belt, a fragmentation grenade in each pocket, and his Colt M1911 pistol holstered on his hip. He took a long breath, filling his lungs with the thick, humid air that smelled of salt water and smoke and something else, something organic and wrong. He thought of nothing in particular. He did not think of home, of family, of the future. He thought only of the rhythm of the gun. 15 seconds between shots. 15 seconds to cross 70 yards. It was not enough time. It was never going to be enough time, but it was the only time he had. He stood up. The movement was smooth, unhurried. He did not crouch. He did not zigzag. He simply rose to his full height and began walking directly toward the bunker. Behind him, the 4 Marines opened fire, their rifles cracking in rapid succession, the bullets tearing into the jungle to either side of the target. The Japanese machine gunners returned fire, but their attention was divided. For a moment, a brief and terrible moment, the focus of the entire battlefield shifted. Owens ran. He ran in a straight line, his rifle at port arms, his eyes fixed on the point where the muzzle flash appeared. The sand beneath his boots was soft, uneven. It pulled at his legs, slowed his stride. He could hear the gun fire again, the shell passing somewhere overhead, exploding behind him. He did not look back. He did not count the seconds. He simply ran, closing the distance, 70 yards, 60, 50. The air around him seemed to thicken, to resist his movement. He could feel his heartbeat in his throat, his lungs burning, his legs driving forward with a mechanical rhythm that felt both desperate and controlled. The jungle was closer now. He could see individual trees, the texture of bark, the shapes of leaves. He could see the bunker. It was larger than he expected, a low, squat structure built from coconut logs stacked horizontally and reinforced with coral and earth. The firing port was a rectangular slit approximately 2 feet wide and 8 inches high, just large enough for the barrel of the 75mm gun to protrude. The gun fired again. The muzzle blast was deafening, a physical force that struck him like a wave. The shell passed so close he felt the heat of it on his face. He did not stop. He covered the final 20 yards at full sprint, his body angled forward, his mind empty of everything except the need to reach the bunker before the gun could fire again. He reached the wall. The coconut logs were rough, pitted with age and insect damage, lashed together with wire and rope. He pressed himself against the side of the structure, breathing hard, his chest heaving. Inside, he could hear voices. Japanese voices, calm and methodical, giving orders. The clatter of metal on metal. The sound of a shell being loaded into the breech. He had perhaps 10 seconds before the gun fired again. 10 seconds before the crew realized he was there. He moved to the firing port and looked inside. The interior of the bunker was dim, lit only by the pale light filtering through the firing slit and a single kerosene lantern hanging from a beam. The space was cramped, approximately 8 feet deep and 10 feet wide, with a low ceiling that forced the men inside to crouch. The 75mm gun dominated the room, its barrel extending through the firing port, its breech mechanism open as a crewman prepared to load another shell. There were 5 men visible. The gunner seated on a low stool behind the weapon, the loader holding a shell, Two assistants, one adjusting the elevation wheel, the other preparing another round, and an officer, a lieutenant or captain, standing to the side with a map in his hands. They were focused entirely on their task. They did not see Owens. He pulled the pin on his first grenade, held it for a 2 count, and threw it through the firing port. The explosion inside the confined space was catastrophic. The blast wave blew out through the firing port, carrying dust and smoke and fragments of shrapnel. The kerosene lantern shattered and burning oil splashed across the interior. Owens did not wait. He pushed himself through the firing port, forcing his body through the narrow opening, his rifle scraping against the logs. He landed on the floor of the bunker in a crouch, his ears ringing, his vision blurred by smoke. The grenade had killed 2 men outright and wounded a third. The others were stunned, disoriented, their faces blackened by the blast. Owens raised his rifle and fired. The first round struck the loader in the chest, dropping him instantly. He worked the bolt, fired again. The second round hit the assistant in the throat. The man fell backward, clutching at the wound, blood pouring between his fingers. The officer reached for his pistol. Owens shot him through the forehead. The remaining crewman, the gunner, lunged at Owens with a bayonet. The blade came fast, aimed at his midsection. Owens sidestepped, brought the stock of his rifle up in a short, vicious arc and struck the man across the jaw. The impact shattered bone. The gunner collapsed. Owens shot him twice in the chest to be certain. The bunker was silent except for the crackle of burning oil and the wet, labored breathing of the wounded assistant. Owens stood in the center of the room, his rifle still raised, scanning for additional threats. There were none. The 75mm gun was silent. The crew was dead or dying, but he could hear movement outside in the trench system that connected this bunker to others further inland. He could hear running footsteps, shouted orders in Japanese. They were coming. He moved to the rear of the bunker, where a narrow opening led into the trench. The trench was approximately 4 feet deep and 2 feet wide, carved into the earth and reinforced with wooden planks. It ran in both directions, disappearing into darkness. The sound of footsteps was closer now. Owens dropped into the trench and moved forward toward the sound. The first Japanese soldier appeared around a corner approximately 10 feet ahead. He was young, perhaps 18, with a rifle slung over his shoulder and a grenade in his hand. He saw Owens and froze for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Owens fired from the hip. The round struck the soldier in the center of the chest, and he fell backward, the grenade slipping from his fingers and rolling into the mud. Owens dove to the side as the grenade exploded, the blast contained by the trench walls, showering him with dirt and debris. His ears were ringing again, worse than before, and he could taste blood in his mouth. He pushed himself upright and kept moving. The trench turned sharply to the left, then descended a short slope into a wider chamber, another bunker or storage area. Owens could see the entrance ahead, partially obscured by hanging vines. He approached cautiously, his rifle at his shoulder, his finger on the trigger. As he reached the entrance, a Japanese soldier stepped out, bayonet fixed, and thrust at his chest. Owens parried with the barrel of his rifle, the steel clashing, and drove his boot into the man's knee. The soldier stumbled. Owens reversed his grip and smashed the rifle butt into the side of the man's head. The soldier dropped. Inside the chamber, 3 more soldiers were preparing to move forward. They saw Owens and opened fire. The shots were wild, panicked. Bullets struck the walls, ricocheted off the wooden supports. Owens dropped to one knee and returned fire, emptying the remainder of his clip in controlled bursts. 2 of the soldiers fell. The third threw down his rifle and ran deeper into the trench system. Owens reloaded, the empty clip ejecting with a metallic ping, and gave chase. The trench narrowed again, became a tunnel barely wide enough for a man to move through. The walls were damp, lined with roots, and the floor was slick with mud. Owens moved as quickly as he could, half running, half crawling, his rifle held in one hand. Ahead he could hear the fleeing soldier, the sound of breathing, the splash of boots in water. The tunnel turned sharply to the right, and Owens followed, emerging into a larger trench that ran parallel to the beach. Sunlight filtered down through gaps in the overhead camouflage. The fleeing soldier was 20 feet ahead, running hard. Owens raised his rifle and fired. The round struck the soldier in the back and he fell forward into the mud. Owens approached, his weapon ready. The soldier was still alive, gasping, trying to reach for something. Owens saw the grenade in the man's hand, the pin already pulled. He turned and dove back around the corner as the explosion ripped through the trench. When the smoke cleared, the soldier was gone, and a section of the trench had collapsed. Owens was bleeding. He did not know when he had been hit, but he could feel the wetness spreading across his left side, soaking through his uniform. He pressed his hand against the wound and felt a sharp, stabbing pain. A fragment of shrapnel or a bullet or something. It did not matter. He could still move. He could still fight. He continued through the trench system, methodically clearing each section. He encountered 2 more soldiers, both armed with rifles. He killed them both. He found an ammunition cache, crates of shells for the 75mm gun, and destroyed it with a grenade. He moved through interconnected bunkers, some empty, some occupied. Each time he cleared them with rifle fire and grenades, never hesitating, never stopping. The pain in his side was worse now, a burning, grinding sensation that made it difficult to breathe. His vision was narrowing, tunneling, but his hands were steady. His mind was clear. He knew what he had to do. He reached the final bunker in the network, a larger structure set into the hillside, and found the remnants of the gun crew that had fled the original position. 4 men, armed with rifles and pistols, positioned behind a barricade of sandbags. They opened fire as soon as he appeared. Owens dropped to the floor of the trench and returned fire, working the bolt of his rifle with mechanical precision. One of the soldiers fell, then another. His rifle clicked empty. He dropped it and drew his M1911 pistol. The Colt M1911 was a .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun, standard issue for officers and senior non-commissioned officers. It held 7 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. Owens had trained with the weapon for hundreds of hours. He knew its weight, its balance, its brutal stopping power. He advanced on the barricade, firing as he moved. Each shot was deliberate, controlled. The first round struck the 3rd soldier in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second round hit him in the chest. The 4th soldier stood, attempting to fix his bayonet. Owens shot him twice, center mass. The man fell across the barricade, his rifle clattering to the ground. The bunker was silent. Owens stood in the center of the room, his pistol still raised, his breathing ragged. The wound in his side was bleeding heavily now, and he could feel the strength draining from his legs. He looked around the bunker, at the bodies, at the scattered equipment, at the entrance that led back toward the beach. He had done it. The gun crew was eliminated. The 75mm gun would never fire again. The beach was secure. He took a step toward the entrance and collapsed. He did not remember falling. He remembered only the sensation of weightlessness, the ground rushing up to meet him, and then nothing. When he opened his eyes, he was on his back, staring up at the low ceiling of the bunker. The pain was everywhere now, a crushing, suffocating pressure that made it impossible to move. He could hear voices outside, American voices, shouting for a corpsman. He tried to respond, to tell them he was there, but his voice would not come. A Marine appeared above him, young, his face pale with shock. The Marine knelt beside him, pressed a hand against the wound, tried to stop the bleeding. Owens could see the fear in the young man's eyes. He wanted to tell him it was all right. He wanted to tell him that it had been worth it. But the darkness was closing in, and the voices were fading, and then there was only silence. Sergeant Robert Allan Owens died of his wounds on the beach at Cape Torokina on November 1, 1943. He was 23 years old. He had been in combat for less than 2 hours. His body was recovered later that day and buried in a temporary cemetery near the beach. The Marines who knew him spoke of his calm, his competence, his refusal to accept defeat. They spoke of the charge across the beach, the assault on the bunker, the pursuit through the trenches. They spoke of the 75mm gun that had killed so many and how one man had silenced it alone. The story spread through the division, then through the Corps, then through the entire Pacific Theater. It became the kind of story that men tell in foxholes, the kind of story that reminds soldiers why they fight. The official after-action reports were more clinical. They noted that the elimination of the 75mm gun at Cape Torokina had allowed the 3rd Marine Division to secure the beachhead and establish a defensive perimeter. They noted that the airfields constructed on that beachhead became the staging ground for the aerial bombardment of Rabaul, the fortress city that anchored Japan's entire defensive network in the South Pacific. They noted that the isolation of Rabaul, achieved through air superiority launched from Bougainville, rendered the garrison strategically irrelevant and saved the lives of tens of thousands of Allied soldiers who would have otherwise been required to assault it directly. They noted that the campaign in the Solomon Islands, which began at Guadalcanal and culminated at Bougainville, had broken the back of Japanese expansion and opened the road to the Philippines, to Iwo Jima, to Okinawa, and ultimately to Tokyo. They did not note that none of it would have been possible if a single Marine sergeant had not made a decision to charge a gun emplacement across 70 yards of open beach. They did not note that the entire strategic edifice of the Pacific War rested, in that moment, on the shoulders of one man who chose to act when every rational calculation said that action was suicide. They did not note that history turns on such moments, on individual choices made in the crucible of terror and violence, on the willingness of ordinary men to do extraordinary things when everything depends on it. Sergeant Robert Allan Owens was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest decoration for valor in combat that the United States can bestow. The citation, signed by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, reads in part, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, Sergeant Owens unhesitatingly took the initiative and advanced alone against the hostile fortification. Entering the emplacement, he drove the gunners out, and pursuing them through a connecting trench, killed several with his rifle and others with his pistol. Although mortally wounded, he refused evacuation and continued to direct his men until satisfied that the position was secure." The citation is accurate, but it is also incomplete. It does not convey the terror of that morning, the weight of the decision, the physical courage required to stand upright under artillery fire and walk towards certain death. It does not convey the loneliness of that charge, the knowledge that no one was coming to help, that survival was not an option, that the only thing left was to make the death count for something. It does not convey the seconds inside the bunker, the violence, the blood, the animal struggle to kill or be killed. It does not convey what it means to pursue an enemy through a trench system while bleeding to death, to fight until the body simply cannot continue, to spend the last minutes of life ensuring that others might live. These things cannot be conveyed in official language. They can only be remembered, and they must be remembered because the world that exists today, the peace that was purchased at such cost, rests on the sacrifices of men like Robert Allan Owens. He did not die for glory. He did not die for recognition. He died because in that moment on that beach with those Marines depending on him, there was no one else. And so he went. The beach at Cape Torokina is quiet now. The jungle has reclaimed the bunkers, the trenches, the gun emplacements. The 75-millimeter gun is gone, rusted into fragments, scattered into the earth. The temporary cemetery where Owens was first buried has been relocated, the bodies repatriated, the graves marked with white crosses in distant fields. The airfields that were built on that beachhead have long since been abandoned, reclaimed by the jungle, visible now only from the air as faint scars in the green. The war moved on. The world moved on, but the debt remains. We owe Sergeant Robert Allan Owens more than a medal, more than a citation, more than a paragraph in a history book. We owe him memory. We owe him the recognition that freedom is not free, that peace is not a natural state, that the world we inhabit was shaped by men who made choices we can barely comprehend. We owe him the acknowledgement that on November 1st, 1943, at approximately 7:26 in the morning, one man stood up when every instinct screamed to stay down, and in standing, changed everything. This is not ancient history. This is not myth. This is the story of a man who lived, who fought, and who died within living memory. There are still people alive who knew him, who served with him, who remember his voice. But they are few now, and they are old, and soon they will be gone. And when they are gone, all that will remain is the story. This story. The story of Sergeant Robert Allan Owens, United States Marine Corps, who charged a gun emplacement alone, who fought until he could not stand, and who died so that others might live. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the cost of the freedoms we enjoy, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where you are watching from, what city, what state, what country. Tell us what this story means to you. And ask yourself this. In a world that often seems to have forgotten the meaning of sacrifice, how do we ensure that stories like this are never lost? How do we honor the men who gave everything when we can give them nothing in return except remembrance? What does it mean to live in a world purchased with such blood? And what do we owe to those who paid the price? Leave your thoughts below. And remember,